Good morning, good evening, good midday, wherever you are across the world watching this particular podcast. Welcome to the Aurum podcast, where we discuss everything regarding human capital. I'm your host. My name is Tony Kuria, and I'm so glad that you could be able to join with us. Today, we are doing the fourth part of the topic that we've been handling this month, the topic of transitions. And it is very apt, as I've kept saying, the nation of Kenya, where we are, is handling a transition. And people are transiting from the presidency to people handling the sub-country units, the governors and members of parliament and all that. There has been a transition. In fact, it was only yesterday and I think today that some of these newcomers are being sworn in. So a transition is taking place. But here we want to discuss workplace transitions. And this is the fourth part that we are bringing to discuss. Today, I have two ladies who are, shall I call them experts? Probably experts. Probably people very well versed with handling transitions. But before I introduce them, I want to also explain what Aurum Podcast is. The Aurum Podcast is hosted by Aurum Consultants, a human resource and risk advisory firm based here in Nairobi, Kenya, and we help companies build winning teams. Now, without further ado, let me introduce the cast that we have today. Zipporah Kuria, the Managing Director of Aurum Consultants. Welcome, Zippy.
Thank you, Anthony. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching us from. I'm glad to be here today and sharing this podcast with our wonderful guests, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Welcome, Zippy. And the wonderful guest, Madam Lilian Gitau, the global program director at Bethany Kids, an old friend. We've known each other. Zippy and I have known her and her husband, like I think it is 20 plus years ago. And finally, we have managed to get her to join us in our podcast today. Welcome, Lilian.
Thank you very much, Anthony and Zippy, for having me here today. I am extremely delighted, and especially with the topic on hand. Thank you for having me here.
Awesome. Now, transitions, as we said, they happen all the time. Change, they say the only constant thing in the human existence is change. You are born, meaning you get out of your mother's womb and you start screaming. If you don't scream, you're pinched to scream. Now, from there, you start suckling, then you start crawling, then you're starting to introduce to solid foods, then you start walking, then within a short time, you are being prepared to go to school. In a short while, you're a teenager. It moves all the way until now you're an old person. In the workplace, also change, especially in this 21st century, change and transition is almost constant. We have experienced it during the COVID season. I mean, if there was anything that really sent the alarm bells ringing to show that things are very different from what they were in the 20th century, was what COVID did. Some of us have never, I'm sure most of you have never worked in front of a computer at home prior to COVID. Carrying work home and working from home was a new experience for people across the world, here in Kenya included. But now, there is a level of transition that sometimes is not comfortable, where either the company you're working for is sizing down, and now you're being told, young man, young woman, now we are thinking of shifting you, moving new locations, shifting your job description, probably promoting you. Promotion is also a transition. Yeah, promotion is also a transition. But most of us think of transitions as, either, being let go, you being fired and all that. So Zippy, let's unpack and look at what a transition really is. How can we best understand transitions?
Thank you, Anthony. When I'm thinking about transitions, just speaking from what you said, we have many types of transitions. And some are transitions that are welcome, some are transitions that are not welcome, they're uncomfortable, and we have to understand the different times and seasons and the transitions that we are going through. And when I look at the workplace, transitions will happen. And it's not a question of if it will happen, it's a question of when that transition happens and what kind of transition that is. Now, I know we've talked a lot about transitions and especially exiting organizations. A lot of times, these are transitions that becomes very uncomfortable, especially to the employee, sometimes to the employer as well. But I think the person sometimes who is affected the most is employee, and especially if it's a transition that was unplanned for. So when I'm looking at these transitions, and let me look at it from a point of employee exiting the organization. This could be because of different reasons. It could be because of a termination, which is an unwelcome termination. And when I talk about unwelcome transition, it means it was not planned for. It was not
Yes.
anticipated. It just happened. Unfortunately, I don't think it's an issue of it was not planned for from the employer's perspective. It is
Yes.
not planned for on the employee's perspective. The employer might have been thinking about it for a while, but for the employee, when it happens very abruptly, then you might find it was a transition that was completely unplanned for, and the employee was not ready for that kind of an exit. Um, it could be because of maybe an organization is restructuring. When organizations restructure, you will find some jobs are lost, some jobs are enhanced, and people are moved around. And you will find during that transition, some people are exiting, some people are being given new roles, some people are being transferred, and there's so manner of transitions that are happening during a restructuring of an organization. So it's also important for us to understand that kind of transition and how it would affect me as an employee. How does it also affect the employer? If you're going to have this kind of transition, how does it affect you? When I go back to the transition of terminations, I need to transit an employee. Probably I've been thinking about it for whatever reason. Either it's because I'm feeling the employee is no longer fitting to the culture of the organization, or they're not meeting the expectations, and I'm thinking this relationship is not going to work. Now, when I'm thinking through all this, I need to think about how it's going to affect the organization, both positively and negatively. There are negative effects when we exit people in an organization. Unfortunately, a lot of times we don't think through the negative effects of terminating someone. So we need to think, if I exit this person in this way, what is the consequence of that? What impact will it have to the organization? It could also be because of a contract expiring. Now, sometimes when we give people contracts, and especially fixed term contracts, we are looking at this contract coming to an end. Then sometimes I've seen in organizations we have this behavior where contract expires and we renew. It expires and we renew. And what that does, it creates an expectation for the employee to expect the contract to be renewed every time it expires. Now, if there's no clear policy and there's no clear communication, and all of a sudden you decide this time around, I'm not going to renew this contract, and you've not been communicating, again, that could end up becoming an unwelcome termination because this employee has not planned for it. Over the last 5, 10 years, you've been renewing this contract, and now all of a sudden you don't want to renew it. So again, how does it affect the organization? How does it affect this person who is being transited from the organization? And I think the bottom line here, or the question we should be asking, is not whether the employee will be transitioned, because at a given time they will exit in employees in a different way. Employees will exit in a different way. Some terminations, some could be an unfortunate incidence of death. I mean, I've had to deal with situations where an employee has transitioned from the work environment because probably they have died. So whatever reason, it will happen at some point. And the question should be, what is at stake here due to these transitions? How do we manage these transitions that would happen in the lifetime of an employee and during the seasons of an organization? And once we understand that, then we'll be able to handle these transitions from a humane perspective. If I am the employer, if I am the HR person handling these transitions, I will be able to handle it from a place of, I understand what this employee is likely to go through. Then I can plan better in a way that even though it will affect them, how does it give them a soft landing? How does it cushion them from the effects, the psychological effects of having to leave their job, which is perhaps their livelihoods and what they have known all along. So I think that's what I would say in a nutshell.
Very good, Zippy. You've brought it very well. I mean, realistically, some of these things do happen. Now, yours is from a consultant's perspective. Lilian, you are right there where you handle these things, I believe. Now, tell us from your perspective, how do we best understand transitions?
Well, thank you again, Anthony and ZP. I am so excited to talk about this topic. And I will maybe approach it from a lived sort of experience, from an employee perspective that have had to go through transition, as well as from just my own personal experience with even moving abroad, moving jobs, and other life issues. I believe human resource people are those professionals that need to pay attention to the whole employee well-being. And transition is such a key part of it. I like what ZP has said. I think this is such a loaded term. It comes loaded with a lot of meaning. And we can discuss this from just virtually any angle. Think about it. I mean, we can approach this. And I think it has been an overused term that hasn't been properly understood. So in this conversation, we hope to bring our listeners to a place of properly understanding what truly transitions are, so that we can be better prepared to help our employees, to help our friends, to help even our children when they are going through those transitions. So really, from a very broad perspective, I think this is a topic that is worth the attention, yet has been given little attention, but people think that they have given it all the attention that it deserves. So I'll start off by some breaking news, and I think Anthony, you touched on this when you were introducing this topic. So the breaking news from my end is every one of us will go through 2 or 3 major transitions in their lifetime. If nothing happens to you in your lifetime, at least you were born. And Anthony, I think you touched on that. And after you're born, you have to make some big adjustments. In fact, maybe that's why we come crying, because we know that we have to transition into something that's not very comfortable.
Yes.
The other thing that will happen to us is, of course, we will die. So other people are left to deal with the psychological factors of our death. But those two are big transitions that each one of us is not exempt from, and we will have to go through that. And in between these two events, there's a lot happening there. As an employee, you may be laid off from work, you may get a new job, you may change jobs, relocate for a job, and all these are factors of transition. So start off our conversation, and you can interject anytime you need to, Anthony and ZP.
Sure.
I think let's consider some 2 very important factors about transitions that many people do not understand, I believe, including organizations. First and foremost, and this is really a repeat of what I have said, at any given moment, each one of us is either getting into a transition, going through one, or getting out of one. Those are factors of life. There's no in between, and there's no avoiding that as well. Now, the second, and what I consider to be the very most important factor in our discussion today, is this aspect of understanding this term transition and what it really entails. I think we tend to confuse transitions with change. That might be very surprising to say. We imagine that a transition is just another term for change, and we are using these two terms interchangeably, referring one to the other.
Yes.
And nothing could be actually further from the truth. And I think Zippy, in her mentioning today, has addressed some of that when she mentions the psychological factors.
Yes.
So I know this seems or may sound rather odd to people because we are very familiar. We have used these terms very interchangeably. And I do not mean to confuse anyone today.
Yes.
It's really, really coming to that deeper level of understanding. Is transition change? Is change transition? Or are these two very different terms? And we have to name a thing in order to address it. We have to
Mm.
understand it properly in order to address it. And using these two terms interchangeably, thinking that they're two and the same, I think that's really the crux of the matter. That
Mm.
has caused a lot of frustration and disappointments, not just for organizations that are implementing change and saying there's a lot of resistance to this change, but for the employees themselves that have to go through this change.
Mm. Wow. 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 You have really given us clearly the idea that transitions and change are two different things. I'll admit, I also did not, I think I had fallen for the trap and the thinking that transitions and change are one and the same. But indeed, they are different. And that's what we want to understand why they are different and also appreciate the fact that the way you've said it, we are either getting into or we are going through or getting out of a transition. That's something that I'm sure our listeners would love. I mean, that's a nugget. If you're listening to us and you want to understand what is it that has been said the last 17 minutes, that's a nugget that we have gotten. We are either getting into or going through or getting out of a transition. And indeed, that's something that most of us, if you sit and think, that's something that we have been going, that's something that really every one of us is going through. Now, Zippy, if I come to you, what are some of the triggers? What are some of the triggers of transitions? What are some of the things that trigger transitions?
Thank you, Anthony. I like the way Lilian has explained this issue of transition and that it's different from change because it's true, we interchange these two terms a lot without realizing actually they are not necessarily one and the same thing. So I could be
Mm.
going through some change, but it's not necessarily a transition. And just
Mm.
listening to Lilian just made me have this thought. A transition will leave a lasting mark in your life
Mm.
either in a positive way or in a devastating way that
Mm.
I mean you will come out of it, but
Mm.
it can be very devastating to your life, so it will leave a complete lasting mark. And just to pick up on your question, and I would want to believe you're asking the question from a point of workplace transition.
Yes,
um,
workplace.
when these transitions happen, they have a lasting mark. Like for instance, you've left your employment and you have nowhere else to go.
Mm.
And you've been transitioned out. It's probably not even your choice to transition from this organization. You've been forced out.
Yes.
And when I'm looking at the workplace transition, some of the triggers I would think, and it's interesting because today I was doing a training and we were talking to managers about how to manage employees. We were training on HR for non-HR managers. And we were discussing how the way we manage our people does have a great effect into their life cycle in the organization. And even when
Yes.
the employee, what I call the employee journey, the journey they go through the organization and the impact that has on them. And one of the things we were talking about is when people leave and we are doing exit interviews, then you hear them talking about the work environment.
Mm.
And you try to understand what do you mean the work environment? What is it about the work environment that is making someone transit? They've actually decided to resign and they are deciding to
Yes.
leave the organization. And you dig deep and you realize it's the work environment that has become an conducive work environment. It's become a very toxic work environment. And this employee chooses, you know what, I don't think really I belong in this place. I want to exit because I can no longer continue working with my manager because they have created an environment where it's so toxic, it's affecting my well being, it's affecting my health, it's affecting the way I think, it's affecting my self-esteem, and I don't think I fit in here anymore. So I would think one of the biggest triggers actually is a work environment, and in this particular case, an conducive work environment. And this is because of the managers and probably the culture we have created in the organization. The other trigger I would probably think it's because of change in terms of business strategy. And maybe the business has decided to move towards a different direction, or maybe in terms of, I'm looking at the way organizations dealt with the pandemic, the COVID situation, and
Yes.
how that had such serious effects on employees, and businesses had to change tact. They had to survive, they had to move to a survival mode. And in the process, there are people who are rendered jobless and they had to leave their employment without much notice. They didn't even know where to start. Here we are being
Exactly.
faced with a global pandemic that no one knows how it will end. And all of a sudden, I've lost my livelihood and no one else is employing. And I'm completely stuck. I mean, it has a life-changing effect. I mean, there are people who are still struggling with those issues. There are people who are still having to deal with the psychological effects of what happened in 2020.
Mm,
There are
mm,
issues, many other issues, many other reasons that will trigger, a transition. It could be interests that are no longer aligned. Probably we
yes.
are working together in this organization, and I feel as an employee, my interests are no longer aligned to the organization, or the organization will feel this person is no longer fitting in our culture, and we want to
Mm,
when as an employee I discover I'm not aligned to the organization, what happens? I start looking for options to exit this organization. And I could
mm,
transition either to another job, I could transition to business, I could move on to doing many, many other things. So I think there's a
mm,
lot of triggers that could lead to a major transition in an employee's life while at the workplace. And it's important to pay attention to those triggers and the effect that those triggers could have. Will this help us in terms of coming up with better strategies on how to manage the same? We will find out.
okay. An open-ended question. I like that. I like that. Leaving it open to see how it goes. And to our viewers and our listeners, you're welcome to send in your comments, your thoughts, your questions regarding this. Probably you've experienced transitions that were pretty unpleasant. Yeah, probably either it was before COVID or during COVID. It could be you are an employer, you are running a business, you're running an organization, and we are discussing from an employee's perspective. But Zippy, you'll agree with me, even for employers, sometimes when your staff decide to leave you, it's like almost like a divorce. You're wondering, why did they leave? Why did they
Actually,
leave
let
me?
me just say something about that, Anthony, because I have
Yes.
suffered because of employees leaving. And sometimes, let me tell you, just the same way an employee would grieve when they've lost their livelihood,
Mm,
sometimes an employer would grieve when they have lost good talent.
mm,
Not when they've
mm,
just lost anyone. Sometimes when
yes.
you're exiting people, we always say there are those people you want to exit, but there are those people you would rather keep to yourself, you would not want to exit. And
Mhm.
when your best talent leaves your organization, I can tell you as a boss, you will go into a mode of wondering, where did we go wrong? What could
Yeah.
we have done to prevent this? And you could go through a motion of mourning. I normally call it a grieving period. This is the same way when you have lost your livelihood, you will go. There's a season. And when I remember about our journey, there's a season you go through. It's like you're mourning. Something has been taken away from you that
Mm,
is so pertinent to your life, you don't even know how to get it back.
yes.
So you go through that season of grieving and mourning and trying to figure yourself out, trying to figure out the business, trying to figure out how will I get someone else who can fit into this role, who is as good as this person we had worked for many years with. And maybe we
Mm,
had invested so much on them and we had hopes in terms of scaling up the business because we have built the business to this point with them. So
mm.
yes, there's a point where employers actually they struggle with those transitions.
Employers moan. So, Lilian, from your perspective, what are some of the triggers of transitions?
Well, thank you, Anthony and ZP. Thank you for that contribution. Very, very useful. I like what employers say. Uh, and this mainly comes from managers. Bring your whole self to work. I'm trying to figure out what that really means. When an employee gets to work, are they, there before we have had to check some few things at the door. You don't think about your child that is sick at home. Now pay attention to your work. Don't think about the incident that you just had when you're getting to work. Maybe someone, hurled some insults on the road. Bring your whole self to work. That's what we normally say. And if employers are really, really serious about this, then they really ought to be curious about who is this employee? What's their whole self? What does that look like? What's their home situation like? When we start saying that this person no longer fits our bill, maybe the culture it has moved on, they have been left behind, they do not have the skill set that they need, maybe the new structure or whatever it is that's happening at work. Why is that? And whose issue is it? So, Anthony and ZP, this issue of employers, particularly, and for us as well as even lay people like myself, that's not a HR professional, but I manage people, a lot of people globally. I need to really be very, very interested in the circumstances and the situation of our staff. So the issue of, even before we get to the triggers, ZP has explained it very well. But I really want to unpack just a little bit about this change and transition. Organizations are big on change. They love, it's the most loved term. I think if you Google it, you might get millions and millions of, views on that. People research it all the time. Change management has become like a cliche within organizations, you know. And there's all these factors of let's innovate, let's, be well staged for whatever is coming. But we forget that, like we said, these two issues are very different. When organizations are concentrating on change, there's this other aspect of transition that has been ignored, because then we think of change as transition. So really, what is change? And I'm not here to educate HR people. They know it better than I can even articulate it. But change is really that situation, that event that happens that you can possibly observe. Something has happened, a situation has changed, it's perceptible, it's tangible, you can see it. You have moved homes, you have moved to a new city, we can see all that's happening. But transition, on the other hand, is very psychological. I didn't want to move on to triggers before I was clear about why I say these two terms are very different, so that there's no confusion. It's very, very, it's all the things that are happening beneath the surface. Now, if we use this overused term of an iceberg, imagine that change is a tip. It's just the observable bit, we can see the tip of that iceberg, but what's underneath that? The mass. That's really the transitional process that we are talking about. All these emotions, all the reorientation, all the self-redefinition that an employee or a person must go through because of that of a change. Whether it's a change of structure, whether they have lost their job and now they have to transition out, there are all these psychological things that are going below that we do not see, sometimes we do not perceive, but we expect stuff to just go on with the flow of change. So I think it's very, very good for organizations and managers, particularly, to come to a very, very key level understanding of the differences in these two terms, so that they can appreciate maybe why the resistance to a change. Why
Mm.
the bad blood, so
Mhm.
to say, after you exit an employee and they're about mouthing you out there, I mean,
Mhm. Yes.
what's really going on there? So this is why it's so necessary to understand. I love Patrick Lencioni. He's a renowned author and speaker on organizational health, and
Mhm.
he puts it very clearly. And this is really what he says. I have a clip here that I allow me to just read. Yeah,
Yes.
that all too often uh, people and organizations that are confronted with a change find themselves struggling and they don't know why. They have applied every practical solution and every technical approach, and they are at a loss for why it's not working.
Mhm.
And then they learn about transition as a distinct process from change. And
Mhm.
finally, they come to an understanding that this human angle or this very wonderfully unpredictable part of business and
Mhm.
leadership and life that academics and experts so often overlook is the difference between their success and failure,
Mhm.
between transformational growth and painful decline for organizations. So,
Mm.
what you say, Anthony and Zippy, the battle is won underneath the surface. Why
Wow.
organizations fail
Uh-huh.
to introduce and integrate change without resistance, it's because they have not gone to the battlefront. And that battle, to use that analogy again of an iceberg, is all beneath the surface. The psychological adjustments and effects of a change that's going on in an employee. They have to adjust to the change, and
Mm.
organizations can't move on without those employees.
Mm.
If we ignore that aspect, what is all this psychology? What are all these emotions? What are the effects on this person? What do they have to lose? What has to come to an end? How can we help them deal with all that? If we ignore that, we will continue to fail as organizations when we are integrating change.
Wow, 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 wow. Lilian, there you have really, if you're listening to us, that is a nugget that you need to download. If you're a business person, you're an entrepreneur, you're a senior manager, you're wondering what is happening. Why are things not working? Now you've had it for yourself. You've had it for yourself. And Lilian, as you were talking, you've made me remember another guest who normally comes here earlier, last week and last week, but when she was here, and she gave us a graphic example of one time she was working in one of the big local banks here in Kenya, and you said something about employers wanting an employee to bring their whole self to the office. And if you are like me and even like Zippy, our parents, our fathers, or especially fathers, they used to take their whole self to the workplace in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s. As in, he enters the office, probably they were fighting with the wife the previous night, probably he has issues regarding school fees. But once he walks into the office, he's a transformed guy. He's there. If it's not the office, if it's he's a cop, if he's a soldier, if he's a whatever it is, the mere fact that he has now entered the work mode, he has brought the whole of himself in the office. And then transitions happen. Probably not bad things, you have not been sacked. Probably it's just you've reached retirement age. Yeah, we had that discussion here in the earlier this month. And our guest was telling us she was working with a boss who retirement age arrived. This guy knew nimefikisha, I think 55 or 60. I will be shaken my hand, I'll be given a fat package, and I will go home. So the problem was not knowing that in the next 3, 4, 5 years, a handshake will take place. No, this Mzee reached the mandatory age. A ceremony was held. Oh, platitudes and accolades were given to him. He was given a fat paycheck.
And the Monday, he was not expected to come to work. Today is Friday. Today is your last day to work. Shake hands. It's been real. You've worked for this organization for the last 20, 25, 30 years. It's been real. It's been good. You've been wonderful. You came into the bank before we were even using typewriters and punching holes. Now you are living when people are using, whatever. Yeah. But Monday, the man could not transition to retirement. He came to the office. And our guest was telling us, fortunately, that employer used the analogy you have just used. They saw beneath the iceberg. They saw what was beneath the iceberg. And what did the senior management of the bank do? They did not tell him, hey, dude, what happened? I thought we gave you money to go. No, they said, since he was a manager and he was running a big branch, they allowed him to use the office. There is now an official manager who has taken over. So this new official the new guy who is taking over the branch was given another office. This old guy, because he was so used to coming to the office, enter. Put your coat there, sit down. He knows he has no work, he has no checks to sign, but he's seated there, reading the newspaper, looking at the ledgers, quarreling with his staff. Why is this not balancing? Yet the official guy is seated over there, and he understood where this mzee is coming from. So that went on for about a few months, I think 2-3 months. Then I think in that period, these guys started digesting that, dude, I am going through a transition. This is for real. The bank is moving on. I need to transition to retirement. So he would come 4 days a week out of 5. Then after a number of weeks, he'd come 3 days a week. Then kidogo, 2 days a week. Then after a while, once in a week, he would come, sit down there. Hey, where's my newspaper? He's given. Yeah. Have you taken over my office? Yeah. You can sit over that other office. So you go sit on that other office, reads the newspaper, looks at the ledgers. He's wondering, now, what am I doing here? So he gently, and then he stopped coming. His employer, though he was retired, understood that the transition this guy is going through is so big. He had brought his whole self to work for the last 35 years. So telling him, hey, dude, like the way we switch off an electrical switch, pop, go home. The guy would have died. Some of his peers, I remember seeing some of those people because I had worked in the 90s when there was that transitioning of people getting, the workplace transitions were taking, especially early retirement and all that was starting to take place. And I saw what happened to some of those people who went home. They had big monies and everything. They had even arranged, organized themselves before retiring. But after they left, some got diseases. And then a short while somebody passes on. So, but this particular gentleman was given a soft landing in terms of there was a difference in the way that his transition was handled. That he was able to go home. It's like a cab, it's like a plane landing. It did not land like a helicopter. It landed like an airplane landing in the airport. So indeed, the call that Lilian you've given to us and to our listeners, that you've got to understand, yes, transitions are taking place, and we are all having this change management, things moving around. We've got to change corporate strategy. We've got to move people around. But you're dealing with a very complex aspect called that employee, who somebody else will handle that transition very quickly. Give me my retire. I want to do something else. And they move and they forget they're ever working for that employer. Others, it takes, and those are very, very powerful points in regards to transitions.
Anthony, I think that what a good example. Well, we can't treat every employee like that. But I think the point that you bring out is whenever there is a change within an organization, I think the organization leaders must give it very thoughtful consideration beforehand on how will this affect each and everyone, because it affects each and everyone differently. Those employees, the staff that's going to be affected by that change, how are they going to react to that? And it's the real manager that you have described, honestly. You know,
Yeah.
we cannot. Well, organizations are not really expected to babysit everyone, but giving giving thoughtful, very considered, consideration to the change at hand, on
Yeah.
that psychological effect and the emotions that each and every staff that's going to be affected will go through.
Yeah.
That's really key to what we are talking about here.
Awesome.
And by the way, even uh, good causes, good triggers, like
Mm,
a promotion,
yes.
causes. We only sometimes we tend to think of transitions on just something negative has happened. A negative
Mhm.
change has triggered this event, this psychological process that we will. No, good things actually trigger transitions as well.
Mm,
There these things that we call imposter syndrome, when you have ascended to a position where you feel like you are just performing, you are an actor on stage and you really don't quite know what you're doing.
yeah.
Every leader that's there, they actually quite don't understand what they're doing until they get the hang of the job.
Mm,
So talking about that beforehand for even those who are getting promoted, is very, very key. And another just general life example of a transition that ought to give us happiness, but sometimes can cause trauma, is even getting married and getting a child.
yes.
It's amazing what type of change that change brings, such psychological adjustment that
Mm,
people have been known to go into depression postpartum.
mm,
Depression. I don't know if men go through that, but I suppose they do. But we pay attention to the woman, thinking
yeah.
that it's just hormonal, but it's not just hormonal. It's all the
Yeah.
psychological readjustment. And you
Mm,
can imagine if that person is an employee,
yes.
going back to work is another readjustment. And if you do not have an understanding manager, then life
Yeah.
becomes really, really difficult. So
Yeah.
transitions, really, the triggers can come from just anywhere, both good and bad. And I think the ZP really covered that very, very well. And your example is excellent, Anthony.
Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. Indeed, to our viewers and listeners, as I said, you are welcome to send in your comments. Send in, probably you went through the same. You are promoted and you thought your problems began when you got a promotion and a your fat check, and you thought, yeah, this is it. And then you realize, dude, hey, the responsibilities are bigger. People whom were peers to you are now looking up to you, and when you enter into the room, they stop talking. And you're wondering, guys, I thought we were buddies. No, they say, dude, you're my boss. We have to give you maximum respect. So yeah, issues of transition, both good transition, getting a promotion, can also lead to a transition or even getting a child. Lillian, you asked if men go through postpartum. Well, I guess it's not it's not hormonal like women, but I guess if you are so used to being your wife's only, especially if it's the first child, you are the man in her life. You used to appear and she's for you, and then now her attention has turned to the baby. And you, like a lion, you're starting to wonder what's wrong with this baby. This baby has prevented me from relating with my wife the way I ought to. So, yeah, those things come. Now, I want to bring something, Lilian, here that I want to ask. Probably we have touched on it, and Zip, you can also contribute and come in. Now, the results of a transition. You have tried everything, but it's not working. So, what is really going on? I think, Lillian, you touched that. I think you've just touched that. Uh, you touched that about what is really going on when things don't quite work out. But I don't know, you can add something there. Zip, you can also bring your analogy to it. Lillian had talked about the great why companies don't transitions happen and they are seeing a slow, painful decline instead of going up. And you touched about the big puzzle that is the human aspect. I don't know whether you have anything else to add, or Zippy, you have something that you could say about it.
Maybe let me say something on that. And I think a lot of it we have discussed, like you have said, Anthony. But when we are going through transitions, no matter what has caused, and this is, of course, from the angle of an organization, maybe there's a change that has happened there. It has affected our jobs as staff, as an employee, or maybe it's even a personal uh, issue that's causing you to go through a transition that's now spilled over to work and it's affecting your performance. I think we need to know that there is a mix of feelings that people go through. A lot is going on. So that what's that mass? To of course go back to the vivid analogy of the iceberg. What are we talking about? What's the mass beneath? And so there are all these feelings and emotions that are going on in people. First of all, there is fear of the unknown, a lot of fear, to use my own personal example, when I exited from the last job that I had, I was working for this organization that I loved, and being a person of faith, I felt that this was a calling into this ministry. I really always approach my jobs as callings, and I felt that God, in His grace and mercy, had led me to this organization, and it truly was a calling. But callings don't last forever, and they come to an end as well if we are truly listening to the leading of God.
Yes.
There was a lot of fear when I exited, because it was part and parcel of me for the last 15 years. It's almost like the example that you have given us, Anthony. It's
Yes.
just that they didn't give me an office to go through my psychological trauma. I had to deal with it privately, and that is what people do. People
Yes.
have to deal with these things privately, and it's so it saddens me that people have to go through this process sometimes by themselves, not knowing how to navigate it. There's
Yes.
also, of course, a lot of anxiety. That's something else that's going on. Now, how do I provide for my family? I'm living here in the United States, but I am actually not I wasn't born here. I was just
Mm.
naturalized. Even if I'm a citizen, I come loaded with a lot of other nuances from where I come from Kenya. So, well, I am a hybrid of sorts,
Yes.
but there are a lot of cultural redefinitions and understandings that I have to come through to actually fit into other types of work within the United States. So
Mm.
that caused me a lot of anxiety. I had never been through this down this road before. And sometimes staff can go through a lot of confusion. Say you have lost your job, there's a lot of panicking, and of course
Yes.
that's related to the anxiety.
Mm.
I then remember talking to someone that had gone through the process, and he said to me, "Expect to be very angry." I said,
Mm.
"What? I'm not angry. I'm okay. You have exited." So the first few weeks are sort of, okay, I have just exited from this job, and maybe there's in your mind, there's a load of opportunities that you can get into. But after a time, there's a lot of anger depending on how you exited. If it was unanticipated, like we have said, if employers just are not mindful of how they exit their employees,
Mm.
I always say exits must never be a surprise.
Mm. Mm.
They should never ever be a surprise to an employee. You should not call them today and tell them you're out tomorrow or that
Mm.
same. That's very traumatic. That's an employer that doesn't have an understanding of what you're talking about, this transition. So there are all these issues that are going on, honestly, and you can get into an identity crisis. I have known people that have such self-doubt in themselves that they were never able to move on. If it was a job that they loved and they got out, it took them a long time to really figure out, who am I? who am I apart from that employment? So, Anthony, these are all the things that are going on, and you can see how pervasive, how very closely integrated transitions are to the individual. And I hope the listeners, if you're managers or staff or organization leaders of some sort, you will take these tips and really consider how do we do change well as we think about transitioning of staff.
Wow, wow. That is very powerful. Zippy, please give us your comments on the same.
Well, I think Lilian has covered it all, but like she said, transitions will cause a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, and especially unplanned transitions. And like she's saying, unless it's a case of a disciplinary issue, and this employee is likely knowing this is the way it might go, transition should never be a surprise. We need to be able to prepare the employee about a transition that is coming so that they can start dealing with it early enough. And I think organizations need to invest in psychological well-being of their people. You can engage counselors. We are always talking with mother who works with an organization that is able to offer such kind of services to organizations.
Yes.
Engage coaches who will help this employee know, okay, I'm being transitioned out. What options do I have? Does this
Mm,
mean this is the end of it? Do I have options? And basically to affirm them is not them as a person that probably you are exiting. Maybe it's a change within the organization that is
mhm,
not going to be able to accommodate them. You need to be able to affirm them for them to know they are still worth the bill. They are not being transitioned because they are worthless. And I think it's important for us as HRs, as business people, to give this much thought. I think, like Lilian has said, and maybe because I'm talking from a biblical entrepreneur perspective, God has entrusted us to run our businesses. He's given us these businesses to be stewards, and the people working for us, we need to be able to take care of them and serve them from a place of love. We keep on talking about serving with love. So if I'm
mm.
going to affect someone's life in a major way, then I need to think through that process. I need to think about the ifs and the buts and the hows. And I think if we start looking at things from that perspective, then we'll be better human beings in how we are handling people. People will leave and they will know, yes, I needed to leave, but I don't feel like I was mistreated or I was leaving this organization.
Very well said, Zippy. Well, well said. Now, a final one as we draw to a close. Uh, Somebody may be listening to us and wonder, okay, from a personal perspective, from an employee perspective, how can I best handle a transition? It has happened. I mean, either it's expected, you've been warned, dude, your contract will not be renewed, it's not going to be renewed, or you're coming to a retirement. Probably you have decided, okay, it's time for me to move on. Like I know the example Lilian gave of women who are going to give birth. There's some women who decide, uh, I'm expecting my child. Uh, I'm not going to come back after I give birth. I want to do, I'll not come back to this workplace. However, you've made a decision, but then there is the consequences of that decision. So, uh, Lilian, let me ask you this. Just you can give us briefly, how can, from an individual's perspective, how can one best navigate a transition?
Thank you, Anthony. And I think this portion is so, so important that we may not really do justice to it
Mm,
just within the couple of minutes that we have left. But I will have to say the very interesting thing about transition, at least based on my own lived experience, is that if you have aborted the process of a previous transition,
mm,
going through the whole thing, sitting with the pain, going
mm,
through the grieving. I think it's Zippy or yourself, Anthony, that say it's like mourning.
mm,
It's really a loss. If let's say you have lost your job, I felt like a big part of me was lost, when I left my last job. And it was very traumatic. So if we abort the whole process, so what tends to happen is people will rush through, they'll get very busy so that they don't even have to think about it. They will bury their feelings, and sometimes they will pretend all is well. When your friends ask you, what's going on? Can we help with that? Oh, I'm good. I'm okay. Everything is working on okay. So sometimes we tend to isolate ourselves. Well, we actually really, really need support at that time, you know
Yes.
and we have all these feelings of maybe shame and embarrassment and just lostness, if I can say something like that.
Yes.
You are just like a ship adrift on the sea without quite some navigation. And that's when you need people, the counsel of the wise, to surround
Yes.
you. But sometimes we can tend to isolate ourselves. And that is aborting the process. If we abort, then what happens with the next big transition?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the funny thing. All the issues from the last one now pile up on the new one, and
Wow.
it's like something has been opened up. All the wounds from the past come back opening up, and so we we are in a crisis that we
Yes.
ought not to be. So we have, even as individuals, the responsibility of seeking the support that we need. As employers look to support their staff, but there's also a part on the employee that please do not isolate, do not self isolate. Seek the help
Yes.
that you need from outside. Do you have a trusted friend? You have a confidant that you can talk to about this issue? And coming back to my faith, that's very important for people of faith because it's an anchor that grounds us. Uh, I found that to be very, very important. Where I was seeking, what's my next step? What does the Lord have in mind for me after this? And surely He showed me after a while. So also the understanding that this is not final. Sometimes
Yes.
you can get into a despair of I'm done. Low to me, I am now, this is it. This is it for
Yes.
me. So, and that quickly gets us into some type of despair. Anthony and Zippy, I do not know if you have seen people who have gone through issues uh, and they are dealing in the same, or they're reacting in the very same way that they have reacted in the past. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to wonder, didn't they learn? We
Mm-hmm.
probably have relatives or close friends like that, say,
Mm-hmm.
what's happening? Didn't this person learn from the last event? That's because maybe
Mm-hmm.
they are good at that process, or they
Mm.
are just stuck in the past. We cannot be stuck in the past. I think it's in the last podcast that ZP mentioned. We must adjust,
Mm-hmm.
we must adapt. Life is dynamic. It moves on with or without you, it's moving on. So we have to quickly come to an understanding of what help do we need and how can we tap into that help to help us navigate out of this situation that we are in so that we are not stuck. But I have to mention, Anthony and ZP, that the transitioning and the navigating of a transition is so much, there's so much there. And we
Yes.
can be able to give models of that transition models. Even maybe in future sessions, your listeners are asking about practical ways to deal
Yes.
and transition. I think that is a topic that may be worth exploring in future as well.
Indeed. 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 That's very powerful. Zippy, do you have something as we come to a close?
Oh, I like the topic, Lilian has said transition models. Even me, I'll
Mm-hmm.
be looking at learning. Ah, what can we do as employees? I think we touched this in the last conversation, and Lilian has brought it out very well. One of the things we must learn as employees is to plan and plan financially.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, most of us live from paycheck to paycheck. Sometimes the paycheck dries up before the end of the month. And especially here in Kenya, where we are paid on a monthly basis. I think in America, Lilian, you guys pay people, I don't know if it's every week or every 2 weeks. So the period is shorter. Now, here where we live month to month, hand to mouth, even for people who have good jobs, we need to learn the art of saving. We talked about if you are to leave your job right now, will you survive for 6 months without necessarily having to adjust your lifestyle? Will you be able to pay rent? Will you be able to take your kids to school? Will you be able to put food on the table as you figure out your next move? A lot of times, and the psychological torture also comes in when we don't have a cushion. I think that actually makes it worse because already you are stressed, you've lost your livelihood, and now
Yes.
adding to it, you have nothing to help you transition. I mean, that could be completely devastating. So let's plan to have a culture of saving. The other thing I think is important for us to realize is possible this job could come to an end. This relationship I have with my employer can come to an end. It will come to an end. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. How it happens, we can't predict. So having that at the back of your mind that this relationship could actually end, then it will probably help us better prepare ourselves psychologically. If this was to happen, then what happens? It's like when we talk about writing a will. Most of us are afraid of writing a will because we are afraid we write a will, we will die. But the question is, are we likely to die? Possibly, yes. If there's no clear way of how your assets and your money is going to be handled, your children will be left suffering. Yet you are afraid of planning. So you have to think about if this job was to come to an end, what would be my plan B? How will I handle this transition? The other thing I keep on saying, you've gotten a job, and especially the young people, don't just sit pretty. Upskill, upskill, upskill. In addition to the skills and the experience you're getting, upskill and make sure you have better skills that would help you in the event you are to transition to another employer. Because the question is always going to be, what value are you adding? If there's no clear definition or there's no clear way of showing the value you're bringing to a new employer, chances are you will miss out on opportunities. So take it upon yourself to make sure you are upskilling even when you're working with your current employer. I think Lilian has talked about this, about adapting. Pick up the, if this happens to you, pick up the pieces and move on. It's never that bad. It's not the end of life. You still have a
Yes.
life to live. You still have skills. You still have your mind. You still have your experience. No one is
Yes.
taking that away from you. I can take
Exactly.
away the job from you, but that does not mean you're completely shattered. You can still be able to pick up the pieces and move on. My mother used to say, I don't know how to translate this from my mother tongue, but she used to say the only thing that does not move is a mountain or when you have put a stone somewhere. And she used to say, "Ujaekelewa mawe kwa kichwa so that you stop growing." So because a job has been taken away from you doesn't mean that there's no tomorrow and you cannot pick up your pieces and move on to your next. So I
Yes.
think there are many ways you can be able to look at this, but there are options. So let's not feel completely helpless because there is a way, and where there's a will, there's a way.
Wonderful, wonderful. Ladies, you have really dissected this topic, and there's still more to dissect, But as we've said, for somebody, especially employees who are who are thinking, I've lost my job, this is it, I'm done. I'm a living example. Twice I was transitioned abruptly from a very good job, and I was told, dude, do not report tomorrow. This is the end. Abruptly, really clean. And I remember the first time it happened, I was staggering in the streets of Nairobi like a drunkard, and I had not consumed any alcohol. The second thing it happened, it was like deja vu. This is happening again. By the third time it was happening, and like what Lilian said, I had let the process, I had gone through the process of handling the emotions. So the third time it happened, it was like, oh, dude, like what Zippy has described, I was like, okay, I have a plan B. They have not taken anything away from me. It's just the paycheck that has gone. But then, as we say, there's also the part of the employer. Probably one of these days we'll discuss how employers ought to handle transitions. I know there in the United States, there's something they're calling the Great Resignation, especially post-COVID, where employers are really struggling to get and retain the best talent because people are not willing to go back to work. If it was to happen here in Kenya, my goodness, that's a different world altogether. Where employers are struggling to handle, in Kenya, that would be utopia. But probably we will reach there one day, one time. With that said, thank you for taking your time this weekend to listen to us as we conclude this topic of workplace transitions. We've discussed this topic from various angles. We've brought different guests who have given us different perspectives, and especially from an employer's perspective. Today, Lilian has given us a very good perspective from both employer and employee, and given us a few very good tools on how to handle that transition. And Lilian, we thank you very much for giving us that unique perspective.
It's been a joy.
Knowing
Yeah.
that there's a difference. Thank you. It's a joy indeed. Thank you, Lilian, for that understanding of there is change and transition. These things change. These things are different and they ought to be handled differently. And therefore, as we come to a close, we want to thank you for taking time to listen to us. If you've loved what you've heard from us, you've heard what we've discussed, you're welcome to get in touch with us. Our contacts are at the bottom of the screen. You can get in touch through social media, through our website, and even by the phone contacts we have there. And especially to those who are leading business, we would love to partner with business people in training them regarding handling transitions for their employees, because transition is also a very sensitive topic for businesses. If you mishandle it, you might find yourself undergoing lawsuits and being sued because of mishandling transitions. And we would love to help businesses to train them on how to handle transitions of their employees, especially when either things are not working, you need to release them. But how do you release your employees procedurally according to the employment law here in Kenya? And if it's issues regarding retirement, how do you do it? Aurum consultants can enable you. We at Aurum Consultants would be glad to partner with you on the same. Lilian, thank you very much. Thank you for taking your 1 hour and 7 minutes of being with us.
It's been my pleasure. What a delightful conversation. Thank you for inviting me again.
Awesome. And we look forward to inviting you again at an appropriate time with with a proper topic. Zippy, thank you for the insights this whole month that you've given us concerning workplace transitions. We look forward this coming month of September with a new topic. So to you, our viewer and our listener, be ready. Next month, we're bringing something fresh, something new in the month of September that we'll be discussing about. But with that said, take care. Have a great weekend. Make sure to join us next Saturday, same time, same place. Thank you.